some were forced to quarantine outside in the cold in parking lots. This viral video, which CNN could not verify, shows others forced to stay in male bathrooms, sleeping under urinals. And this one, the video says it's a quarantine site for kids in Henan province. A little boy jumping on bricks to avoid the pool of dirty liquid. This is where they use the bathroom. This woman sobs on the ground, crying that after she was caught with her mask pulled down, the government suspended her business for 30 days, losing a month's income. Metal spikes, which the man filming says were installed on a compound gate to prevent residents from leaving.
Last week, a huge fire broke out at an apartment complex in that city. The government had sealed most of the doors in the building, including the exits to the outside. It took firemen more than 3 hours to control the blaze, and by that time, 10 people had roasted to death inside, including a 3-year-old child.
So things are not looking very good in China, as you saw in the introductory part of the video, and you may wonder why these protests are of any significant importance. Why are they different compared to other protests that have happened up until now? And anyone who followed Chinese history closely and looked at the level of unrest, you'd see that the protests are usually separated into various categories. For example, the most popular ones, and oftentimes the most numerous, are labor protests. When the CCP usually cracks down on a sector in the industry, you will have sometimes millions of people going out and protesting. Student protests can happen, but more popular are the farmer protests, usually when the CCP starts putting a new tax or they're not giving the welfare they promised. You can have the farmers going up and protest. And of course, much rare, but they do deserve its own special mention, the political protests. The latest one that happened was in Hong Kong, when people are actively protesting against the CCP. Now, all of these protests were isolated within their various interest groups, and usually didn't require much physical force in order to crack down on them. The CCP would just arrest the leaders that were instigating these protests. Sure, sometimes violence would be used on the street, but nowhere to... It was very similar to how many European Union nations have cracked down on its own civil dissent during the COVID protests. I mean, sure, maybe you have a image of a woman getting beaten by the police, or maybe a police dog attacks someone, or like you had in Canada, another nation, where a horse trampled on a woman for public health. Those would happen, but it wasn't like Tiananmen Square level of violence. So the reason this particular protest is interesting is due to the fact that all of the aforementioned interest groups that we talked before, the students, the farmers, the laborers, all of them are now protesting together. And it seems that they have some level of coordination going behind the scenes. So it is going to be incredibly difficult for the CCP to crack down on these protests in the same peaceful manner that they have done up until now. And we are already witnessing various new ways, new scientific breakthrough into controlling the population that have never been seen before. For example, we do have the Huawei phone deleting footage from people that are filming the protests. So I want you to understand what we're talking about. Like, you can be out on the street with your own personal phone and you get to see some police officers abusing civilians, and you want to film that. Well, obviously, if you upload it on the internet, it would be deleted. But let's say you just want to film it so you can show it to your friends and family. Well, you can't, because it's going to be deleted from your phone as well. I mean, that is some horrifying shit, isn't it? But when you think about it, similar things have been done into the West, but to a much less of a degree. There was this documentary which came out during COVID that was scrubbed from the internet. So if you were to upload it on Twitter, if you were to upload it on Facebook or on YouTube, you would automatically get your account banned. I'm pretty much sure like people know about the documentary I'm talking about. I'm not saying that the documentary is true or false, but what I'm saying is the principle exists, where you can just delete information that other people don't want you to have. Now, the idea of internet censorship in the West is not a foreign one. I mean, we are aware that sometimes the corporations can decide you're not allowed to share this, so you can't. But what was particularly egregious in this circumstance was that even having the documentary on your personal computer, if you stored it on Google Docs, and you didn't share it with anyone, it was just for you, some people claimed it was deleted. Like that's what really boggled my mind. It's like, why are people upset about this? Because if you think about it, the technology is there for something similar to happen in the West. Like, if all the corporations would want to do it, I don't see why it wouldn't be done. Like, I don't see what would prevent companies from doing something like this. So, for example, if you actually read the Windows new terms of service, they can also do that. So, if you have a document on your computer that Windows doesn't like technically you agree within the terms of service that they can actually remove that document from your computer if it's connected to the internet, of course. And you get the same thing with the terms of service for Google Docs and for other type of services which are connected to the internet or are in the cloud. And it's going to get to the point where you realize that most people do not stock their information on physical hard drives anymore. Like, most of the information is either in the cloud or it's on a computer that has access to the internet. Like, we do not use floppy disks. We do not use CD-ROM drives or DVD drives. We do not use even USBs anymore. Unless you just want to copy one folder from one place to another. But, like, people do not just store their information on a USB for safekeeping. Like, most of your information is now vulnerable. And we get to see how the internet and the corporations get to decide what is acceptable for the public and what isn't. And obviously, you know, we are not at the level of China yet. But, like, the technology is there. It is possible that it would happen here. And there are no laws or regulations preventing that from happening here. And there's not even talks about, like, let's put some legal safeguards so that a company can just decide what it is allowed and isn't allowed to be shared between people online. In fact, most of the politicians, they want more control. They want the companies to do that. And as we get to see in China, they are working hand in hand with Apple in order to quash dissent. Like, for example, Apple removed a very popular feature which existed on an app called AirDrops that allowed the protesters to communicate with one another. And Apple made it so that unless you turn on the feature every 10 minutes to receive messages from everybody, then you can't get messages anymore. In other words, Apple, surprise, surprise, yet again is siding with the biggest bully. In this case, the CCP. So, corporations and governments can work hand in hand to their mutual benefit in order to suppress dissent, as we saw in China. There is absolutely nothing stopping the same happening in the United States. And indeed, it is very concerning. But it is also going to be very interesting to see what is going to happen now in China with regards of these protests, because as I mentioned before, it will be very difficult to dismantle them. Regarding the reason for the China's zero COVID policy, no honest person can say that this is for public health, given the fact that almost no other nation in the world right now is doing lockdowns or is treating COVID the same way China is treating it. I do assume it might have to do a little bit with the economic fallout that is going to happen. You see, the Chinese government has managed to keep people complacent with the following social contract. People are going to have a roof over their head and a meal a day. In exchange, the Communist Party gets to do pretty much whatever they want. And up until now, they pretty much respected this social contract. Now, obviously, there are people in China that do not have homes, and obviously there are people who can end up being hungry. But by and large, overwhelmingly, this promise has been kept. However, with the fall of Vanguard and other economic problems that China is facing, it seems that this promise may not be able to be kept in the future. So the social contract can actually dismantle. And I do believe that China wants to exercise even more control on its people to make sure that when that happens, they will not be able to effectively protest and effectively rise up against the leadership. That is my personal opinion, why I think that despite all of the other nations around the world not using lockdowns, and especially not to that level that the CCP is using, this is the actual reason for why people are being locked up in their own homes and entire cities are being turned into the largest prisons that the world has ever seen. Let me know what you guys think though, and as usual I will see you in the comment section. And of course, if you want to support this channel, there is a pinned comment that will take you to my subscribe star, where if you want to throw a tip, I would very much appreciate it. Take care.